Hi, my name is Jordan Gross, and I am the Associate Director of Student and Family Ministries here at Mount Tabor, and I am thankful to get to spend a moment devoting with you today on this Easter Monday. And so as we begin our time together, I want to do so in the same way that I started a devotion for some of our youth a couple of weeks ago. And I just want to spend a moment asking you to consider, how is it with your soul? If you would like to pause this and sit still with this for a minute with you and God, then feel free to do so. I just posed this question knowing that this is a really hard time for some of us. It has caused many of us anxiety and just uncomfortable feelings as we grapple with a lot of unknowns. And so with that, I just want to begin our time together offering you a moment to check in with yourself and your heart and your soul, and just consider how you might be doing, what you might be struggling with, what you might need prayers for. I know that our pastoral staff here at Mount Tabor would be delighted to listen to any concerns or fears that you might have. And so I just want to offer you a moment to check in with those things. So with that, I want to just start off by saying that I know that this Easter probably did not look the way that most of us thought that it would at the church. Typically on Easter, we gather our families and put on our Sunday best and head to church to greet one another and to hug each other and to worship together. But yesterday didn't look quite like that. The church was empty. The parking lot and the sanctuary and the all spa and the choir loft and the stages, they were all empty. We did not gather together. But yet the emptiness feels important to this time, and perhaps this is the moment to ponder such emptiness. To me, it feels like Easter right now is the breath of relief and hope that our world so desperately needs right now. The Easter story is a brutal and beautiful. Brutal is one of my favorite authors, calls it a picture of both hope and suffering, which is not so unlike what our world is going through right now. And so although we are in the midst of this pain and suffering at this moment, although we do not know quite what lies ahead, and that's hard, because of Jesus, because he suffered on our behalf so that we might have victory in him. We know that there is light that shines in the darkness, and that the darkness will not overcome it. That scripture I just quoted from the first book of John, verse 5, reminds me of all of the light that we are seeing in our world right now, even in the midst of this really unsettling time. As we rejoice in Easter, I'm reminded of the acts of kindness we've seen throughout these past couple of weeks and months. People cheering for healthcare workers nightly, sewing masks and creating care packages for essential workers, offering to buy groceries for their neighbors with no strings attached and no questions asked. This time has really been a time that has revealed collective empathy, collective compassion. In most of our lifetimes, our world has rarely ever been in a situation quite like this, where each one of us is so deeply affected by the same thing in some way. It is communal grief, communal suffering, communal compassion. I believe that that is the way that God has called us to live together, to be in community with one another, to live in love with each other, to share one another's joys as well as one another's hardships, to both rejoice together and to grieve together. I can't think of another time or a better example of this happening than in our world right now. And so on the other side of that coin, we also find ourselves carrying one another's burdens, deeply feeling for and protecting our families and our community out of love for those in our lives, not just on behalf of our vulnerable people, but of those who are vulnerable throughout our churches, throughout our city, our country, and our world. It is as though through this time we have been reminded of what was always true, that we belong to each other, The way that we have been caring for one another is what I believe is a little bit of what the kingdom of heaven looks like. And it is my prayer that if we take anything from this time, that it would be this community and collective compassion. And so in our collective uncertainty and in our collective grief, how precious, how sacred, how comforting is it that if there is anyone who has mastered the depths of empathy, who knew the sorrow and the suffering that our world has felt, it was Jesus. In his time on earth, he experienced the entirety of the human emotional spectrum, joy and anger, and most importantly, intense and profound suffering. May we remember that even in the darkest and most gruesome and most dismal story in the Bible, that after the sorrow came joy, after the night came morning, and after the darkness came not just light, but new life. So that is where we find ourselves now. Our world is still suffering. We are not out of the darkness yet, but we rejoice in Easter because he is risen. He is risen indeed. And we remember that this rejoicing does not come without suffering, without resurrection. And yet we are reminded of the hope that despite our world's current state, beauty is continuing to rise from the ashes. People are continuing to come to know God's love. Because of Jesus, because of hope and love and never-ending streams of mercy, we can cling to the reminder that joy and light are always on the horizon. So as we sort of consider this message and consider the emptiness that many of us might have felt yesterday, perhaps not only in our churches and in our sanctuaries, but perhaps also in our hearts. I just want to leave you with this quote that a friend of mine had sent to her from a mentor, and she shared it with me. It says, "Christ's resurrection did not begin or end with large gatherings of Christians accompanied by choirs and organ blasts. It began with an empty tomb and 3 fearful women, a tomb emptied of death. This is the Easter, to ponder such emptiness, to linger over it, indeed to revel in it. This is the Easter, to let our sanctuaries and chancels, our narthexes and choir lofts remain utterly empty, not in despair, but in testimony that lives are being saved in doing so. Emptiness, in this case, is life-giving. Perhaps we can remember that emptiness was the first sign of Christ's victory over death." Amen.